The contract nurses never lasted past 6 months. That's what Dr. Pierce had said during the handoff, his voice carrying the casual cruelty of someone who'd never needed to question his own words. Megan O'Brien stood 3 feet from him, her scrubs still smelling of the industrial detergent from the hospital laundry, her badge clipped to her collar at exactly the regulation angle. She didn't flinch. She didn't acknowledge the comment at all. She simply turned the page on her shift report and waited for the next patient assignment like someone who'd been trained to absorb disrespect without letting it land. Norfolk in March was grey. The kind of grey that settled into everything, the concrete of Cedar Creek Medical's parking lot, the linoleum corridors of the pediatric intensive care unit, even the fluorescent-lit rooms where children lay connected to machines that breathed for them. Megan had chosen this assignment because of that grey. Because Norfolk was far from Fort Liberty and Camp Lejeune and the sprawl of military infrastructure where someone might recognize her. Because Cedar Creek Medical's pediatric wing had precisely the kind of understaffed, overworked environment where a contract nurse could move quietly through hallways without drawing attention. She'd spent her first 3 months doing exactly that. Moving quietly. Checking dosages with meticulous precision. Learning the rhythms of the unit, the way the machines beeped in sequence, the way nurses changed shifts in that 15-minute overlap when information got transmitted and files got handed off. The way Colonel James Hartwell sat in the corner of his daughter's room every single day, his wheelchair positioned at a 45-degree angle, one hand always within reaching distance of 8-year-old Emma's rail. The intelligence briefing had been sparse. Foreign operatives suspected of targeting high-value military families. Exploitation of medical vulnerability. Leverage. The word that had made the assignment necessary in the first place. Emma had been in a car accident 6 months ago, drunk driver on IE-64, 3 vehicles involved, Emma's spine fractured at TE-7. The colonel's daughter was now paralyzed from the chest down, which meant she was now also the perfect vulnerability in an enemy's playbook. A grieving father who'd move mountains. A child who couldn't run. A hospital where visitors came and went with almost no security screening. So Megan had come to Cedar Creek Medical under a contract assignment with a carefully constructed file showing 12 years of nursing experience, 3 years of ICU work, and no background beyond the standard references. She'd come to watch. To protect without anyone knowing she was there. What she hadn't expected was the billing codes. The first flag had appeared during her second week, a routine review of Emma's chart before morning rounds. A CT scan. Medically unnecessary given Emma's stable neurological status and the recent MRI that had shown no new pathology. Megan had noted it in her internal log. A single data point, meaningless on its own. By week 4, the pattern had revealed itself. 2 more CT scans. A full-body PET imaging study. An unnecessary repeat of the same chest X-ray from the previous day. All for Emma Hartwell. All ordered by Dr. Pierce. All billing to the Colonel's TRICARE insurance at approximately $4,200 per study. By week 12, Megan had documented 23 unnecessary diagnostic orders across the pediatric wing, with Dr. Pierce's signature on 17 of them. She'd begun cross-referencing the imaging facility on the orders, Radiant Core Imaging Solutions, a private company operating out of an office park on Military Highway, less than 3 miles from the hospital. She'd started keeping notes in a secure encrypted file on her phone, numbers and dates and names written in the clinical shorthand of someone documenting patterns. Pain was information. That was what her survival medical instructor had taught at Fort Liberty, sweating in a Georgia August in a building with no air conditioning. Pain was data. Fever was data. A billing code was data. Everything told a story if you learned to read it. The morning rounds had started at 6:13 a.m., which was 12 minutes earlier than the scheduled start time. Dr. Pierce moved through the unit with a stethoscope looped around his neck like a status symbol, his white coat pristine enough to suggest he didn't actually touch patients very often. He was 48, Megan had determined, with the soft hands of someone who'd never worked in an actual ER and the expensive watch of someone whose family money had come before his medical degree. Harvard Medical School. That much was visible on his office nameplate. The other part, the part about the kickback arrangement, the consulting fees, the ownership stake in Radian Core, that would take longer to confirm. Let's see the Hartwell girl, Dr. Pierce said, not bothering with pleasantries. The attending physician on day shift, a woman named Dr. Keyes, nodded and led the group toward Bay 4. 3 residents trailed behind. A medical student. Megan followed at the periphery, her tablet already pulled up with Emma's vitals and the medication administration record. Emma Hartwell had her mother's dark eyes and her father's jawline, the kind of genetic inheritance that made Megan think about bloodlines and duty and the way certain families seem to encode resilience into their DNA. The child was awake, though barely. At 8:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, Emma should have been alert. Instead, she was drowsy, her oxygen saturation at 94%, her heart rate elevated at 103 beats per minute. "How's our girl doing today?" Dr. Pierce asked, not to Emma, not to Colonel Hartwell, but to the attending, as if the child and her father were medical equipment rather than people. "Stable," Dr. Keyes responded. "No acute changes. Chest tube output normal. Tolerating tube feeds well." Megan moved forward without being asked. She'd learned the geography of Emma's care the way she'd learned the geography of Kandahar, every corridor mapped, every supply closet noted, every camera angle and line of sight catalogued for situations where a child might need rapid intervention. She approached the bedside and began her assessment, her hands moving with a kind of careful precision that came from performing the same procedure in the field with shrapnel embedding itself into your forearm and rounds coming through the canvas of a field tent. "Chest tube placement looks good," she said quietly, checking the dressing around the drainage line. "No signs of infection. Output trending appropriately." Dr. Pierce's eyes flicked toward her for exactly 1 second. "The contract nurse with opinions," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone that made it clear he was speaking to the residents, not to her. "You know, we don't really need that level of detail from the agency staff. They rotate through here, write their paychecks, and don't develop any real understanding of continuity of care. The chart notes are sufficient." He turned back to Dr. Keyes. "I want another CT to establish a baseline. Something about her positioning concerns me." Megan felt Colonel Hartwell's eye shift toward her. Just for a moment. Just a flicker of awareness, the way a soldier notices when someone has picked up on something important. She kept her face neutral. She didn't react. She simply documented the order in the chart and moved to her next task. But her mind was already moving through the numbers. Another CT. Another $4,200. Another radiologist report that would come back normal because there was nothing wrong with Emma's positioning. Nothing wrong at all except that her father was worth something to someone, and someone was systematically draining his insurance company of funds in a pattern that would take months for any auditor to notice because the orders came from a respected attending physician at a reputable hospital. The rounds took another 45 minutes. By 7:52 a.m., the group had rotated through the remaining pediatric patients, and Dr. Pierce had ordered 7 additional diagnostic studies that Megan knew would come back with no significant findings. 7 unnecessary procedures. 7 billing codes that would be transmitted to insurance companies that would pay them without question because the orders came from Harvard Medical School and a teaching hospital and a physician with hospital privileges and an unblemished record. She moved through the morning with the rhythm of someone who'd been trained to compartmentalize. Medication checks. Vital signs. Chart documentation. The gentle business of keeping a child alive while her body healed itself and her family waited in that particular kind of desperation that made people vulnerable to exactly the kind of situation Megan was now tracking. At 11:14 a.m., she pulled the medication administration record for Emma's 1,100 doses of pain management and antibiotic prophylaxis. Triple-checked every dosage. Confirmed the routes. Verified the concentrations. This was the part that had made Dr. Pierce make his comment about contract nurses and continuity of care, the fact that she checked everything twice, then checked it again, the way someone checks medication dosages when a child's safety is the only thing that matters. Colonel Hartwell watched her do it. His eyes followed her hands as she confirmed the 4-line placement, as she checked the infusion pump settings, as she documented everything in the precise medical shorthand that only certain people understood. Megan felt his attention the way she'd felt enemy muzzle flashes in the dark, as a presence, a weight, a form of recognition. "You train her, or did she come to you like this?" the colonel asked quietly, speaking to no one in particular, his voice carrying the edge of someone who'd spent his career evaluating people for exactly how much competence they possessed. Dr. Keyes looked up from her notes. "Megan's contract through an agency. She's been rotating through the unit for a few months." The colonel nodded slowly. His hand was resting on Emma's rail, and his daughter was watching him watch Megan with the kind of awareness that children develop when they've been in hospitals long enough to notice which staff members actually knew what they were doing. Emma was 8 years old. She'd had her spine fractured by a drunk driver. She could read people now in ways most children couldn't. Megan finished her documentation and stepped back from the bedside. She didn't look at the colonel. She didn't acknowledge his observation. She simply moved to the next task on her list, the way someone moves when they've been trained to execute duties without requiring external validation. But that evening, as she was changing out of her scrubs in the locker room on the 3rd floor, Megan's fingers found the faded 7th Special Forces group patch sewn inside her jacket lining. She touched it the way she always did at the end of shift, confirmation that the identity was still there, still hidden, still waiting. The patch was worn at the edges, the green faded almost to grey from 3 years of concealment. Her unit patch. Her real unit. The one that had spent 18 months in Kandahar and had come home with exactly 12 surviving members out of the original complement of 15. She pressed her thumb against it, feeling the embroidered letters under her skin, and then she pulled on her civilian clothes and walked out into the Norfolk grey. What she didn't know yet was that Colonel Hartwell had already recognized what she was. What she didn't know was that a single observation during morning rounds, the way her hands moved, the way she checked protocols, the way her eyes scanned for threats, had told him everything he needed to know about who was really in his daughter's room. And what neither of them knew was that in exactly 14 days, Emma would experience a medical crisis that only someone with Captain Megan O'Brien's particular training could survive. That the Pentagon liaisons would arrive not as punishment but as a rival. That the quietest person in the room might actually be the one holding it all together. But that was later. For now, Megan drove home through the grey March rain, her hand steady on the steering wheel, her mind already deep in the numbers. 23 unnecessary diagnostic orders. 3 of them for Emma. Dr. Pierce's signature on all of them. A pattern that was about to become impossible to ignore. Dr. Pierce stood in Emma's doorway like he owned the room, holding Megan's charting notes between his fingers as if they were contaminated. Colonel Hartwell sat beside his daughter's wheelchair, one hand on her shoulder, watching the doctor with the careful attention of a man trained to assess threats. Emma's small fingers picked at a loose thread on her blanket, oblivious to the tension crystallizing in the air. "This nurse's sloppy documentation could have caused a medication error," Pierce announced, his voice pitched to carry into the hallway where other staff began to freeze mid-stride. He didn't look at Megan. He looked at the colonel. 8-year-old pediatric patient. Triple-strength acetaminophen dosing. If someone less vigilant had been working this morning, we could be talking about liver failure. Megan stood at the 4 pump, checking the tubing flow. Her jaw muscles tightened exactly once. That was all. Her hands remained steady as she adjusted the line, her posture unchanged, her eyes on the monitor as if Dr. Pierce's voice was just another ambient sound in the room, the same as the ventilator's wheeze, the same as the heart monitor's digital beeping. 1 second of tension, then nothing. Stone. Colonel Hartwell's frown deepened. Dr. Pierce, her documentation was. Nurse clipboard needs to stick to bedpans until she learns proper procedures. Pierce cut him off, his tone suggesting Megan wasn't even in the room. We can't have contract staff questioning physician expertise. Emma's care is too important for that level of incompetence. Megan finished checking the 4, made a notation on the electronic chart with 2 precise keystrokes, and looked at Emma. How's your pain level this morning, sweetheart? Still 3 out of 10. Emma nodded, and Megan touched her shoulder for exactly half a second, then moved to the door. Her composure didn't crack. Not even a flicker. The kind of calm that comes from having already survived things that would break most people. Colonel Hartwell watched her leave, something shifting in his expression, not anger, but reassessment. The colonel had trained soldiers. He understood the difference between someone who flinched and someone who didn't. The break room smelled like burnt coffee and the tang of antiseptic from the morning cleaning crew. Megan pushed through the double doors at 1015 hours to find 3 nurses already seated around the small rectangular table, Jennifer sorting through sandwich containers, Marcus reading something on his phone, Susan stirring sugar into a cup. They'd been talking. The conversation had stopped 3 seconds before she entered. Jennifer stood first. Then Marcus. Then Susan. 15 seconds of subtle choreography, the gathering of half-eaten lunch containers, the pushing back of plastic chairs, the careful avoidance of eye contact. No words. No explanation. Just the sound of their departure, 3 sets of footsteps on linoleum, the whoosh of the break room door closing, the fluorescent lights humming their indifferent electric song. Megan set her lunch tray on the table where Jennifer's abandoned sandwich sat, still steaming. The coffee in Susan's cup was still warm. She didn't touch any of it. She opened her meal, turkey and crackers she'd prepared at home, and ate mechanically, chewing without tasting, aware of the silence in a way that soldiers understand silence. Silence meant observation. Silence meant others were making decisions about you in adjacent rooms. She finished eating at 10:42 and disposed of her containers. By 1100, she was back on the unit, checking medication orders, reviewing labs, moving through the afternoon like a ghost that nobody acknowledged but everyone watched. When she passed Jennifer near the nurse's station, Jennifer's eyes dropped to the keyboard in front of her. The classic move. Don't make contact. Don't encourage conversation. Don't be associated with the problem. That afternoon, the bulletin board, the physical one on the unit wall where staff schedules and announcements lived, had been updated. A new document, laminated, posted at eye level where no one could miss it. Megan read it once, standing alone in the hallway. Disciplinary notice, M. The Brian, failure to follow proper chain of command, questioning physician orders without authorization. Effective immediately, all diagnostic imaging orders must be approved by attending physician before patient communication. Jennifer read it aloud to 2 other nurses, her voice carrying just enough volume for Megan to hear as she approached the supply closet. That was intentional. That was Dr. Pierce's strategy, not secret humiliation, but public humiliation. The difference between a disciplinary letter and a performance review was the bulletin board. The bulletin board meant everyone knew. The bulletin board meant the decision was final. Dr. Pierce stood near the medication cart, arms crossed, watching Megan's reaction with the intensity of someone waiting for her to break. His presence made the air pressure change, the kind of gravitational weight that comes from someone accustomed to authority and convinced that authority was his natural state. His eyes tracked her face for the micro-expression he was expecting. A flush. A tremor. A blink that lasted too long. Megan read the notice once more, processing every word with the same precision she used for medication counts. Then she continued to the supply closet, pulled open the door, and selected a box of 4x4 gauze pads with the same attention she'd give to any other task. When she turned back, Dr. Pierce was still watching. She met his eyes for exactly 2 seconds, not defiant, not submissive, just present, then moved past him to the patient rooms. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what happened during her shift change briefing with the evening nurse, Jessica. Megan was describing Emma's medications and care plan when Dr. Pierce appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. Additional imaging ordered for the Hartwell child, he said, his voice smooth as silk. CT chest with contrast, this afternoon at 1400. Summit Imaging is sending a transport tech. He didn't ask if it was necessary. He didn't wait for questions. He stated it like law and disappeared before anyone could respond. Jessica looked at Megan. Megan looked at the chart. The notation read, rule out pulmonary complications. Monitoring for atelectasis. Emma had complained of mild chest tightness during rounds this morning, but her oxygen saturation was normal, her breath sounds clear bilaterally. The previous imaging from 5 days ago, ordered after Emma mentioned a slight shortness of breath during physical therapy, had shown nothing remarkable. The imaging from 10 days before that had been ordered for what Dr. Pierce documented as a general post-trauma assessment, though Emma had shown no symptoms. This would be the 4th comprehensive imaging study in 14 days. Megan did the arithmetic, $3,200 per CT, contrast additional. Insurance would pay without question because a Green Beret colonel's daughter got the benefit of the doubt. Cedar Creek Medical would bill it without question because Dr. Pierce ordered it. And Megan had just been officially disciplined for asking why. She pulled up the billing codes on her hospital computer after the shift ended at 18:30. The codes didn't match the documented justifications. They never did. Pierce was ordering comprehensive multi-system assessment every time but documenting specific clinical concern justifications that didn't align with radiology protocols. It was elegant fraud, specific enough to seem medically necessary, vague enough to avoid triggering utilization review flags. During evening rounds, Emma mentioned that her chest felt tight again. Like there's pressure, she said, her small voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Pierce arrived with his characteristic efficiency, listened to her lungs for approximately 12 seconds with his stethoscope, and announced, anxiety. Completely normal for pediatric trauma patients. The scan this afternoon will be reassuring for her. He left without palpating Emma's chest wall, without checking her cardiac rhythm with any rigor, without examining anything except making a diagnosis that fit his schedule. Megan documented everything. Patient reports chest tightness, described as pressure sensation. Heart rate baseline at 84. Respiration slightly elevated at 18 per minute. Oxygen saturation 98% on room air. Lungs clear to auscultation bilaterally. No acute distress noted. Anxiety suspected as contributing factor per attending physician assessment. Colonel Hartwell watched her from his chair beside the wheelchair. She's going to be okay, right? Megan met his eyes. The kind of steady contact that military people recognize. I'm watching her closely, sir. He nodded once, and something in his expression suggested he understood that wasn't a casual statement. It was a commitment. That evening, Pierce made 3 phone calls from his office. Megan didn't overhear all of them, but she caught fragments. His door had been left slightly ajar as he spoke to someone named Davidson, something about external review, something about problematic staff. By the time she left at 1900 hours, she'd found the email request in the hospital system notification she had access to as floor nursing staff, Dr. Pierce requesting Megan's transfer to a different unit, citing incompatibility with physician leadership and insubordination regarding standing orders. She sat in her car in the Cedar Creek Medical parking lot for 7 minutes, her hands gripping the steering wheel with the kind of pressure that would leave marks. The trembling started then, not fear, not frustration, but the precise physiological response of someone processing the acceleration of a threat, understanding the escalation pattern, recognizing that this was no longer about questioning unnecessary imaging. This was about removing her from the unit. This was about making sure she couldn't monitor whatever came next. This was professional competence in service of something deeply wrong. Megan reached into her jacket lining and felt the faded unit patch sewn there at the 7th Special Forces Group insignia, worn soft from 2 decades of hands touching it. The reason she'd accepted a contract nursing position at a civilian hospital in Norfolk in the first place. The reason she'd let her Green Beret background stay classified. The reason she understood that sometimes heroism meant being invisible until the moment it stopped being a choice. She started the engine. The parking lot was empty except for a security guard doing evening rounds. The hospital stood behind her, lights glowing in the windows, 847 beds of which she could monitor only one. Emma was somewhere in those walls, and by tomorrow afternoon, Emma would have her 4th unnecessary CT scan. And unless Megan did something that would reveal everything she'd been sent here to conceal, nobody would stop him. The morning light through the ICU windows looked sharp and sterile, the kind of white that made everything beneath it seem false. Megan moved through rounds with the same measured pace she'd maintained for 2 weeks, composed, quiet, present but not present, the way you moved when you were counting resources and exits. 7:30 a.m. The shift board showed for patients, 2 vents, 1 stable post-op. Emma was in Bay 3, and the moment Megan approached the glass partition, something in her nervous system activated. Not panic. Recognition. Emma's color had changed. Subtle. A grayish tinge across her cheekbones and upper lip that shouldn't have been there. The child's skin had been consistently pink, well oxygenated, the kind of healthy pallor you got from 3 weeks in a hospital room. Now it looked like someone had dimmed the saturation. Megan stepped closer without moving closer, the way you assess threats, by watching instead of approaching. Emma's chest rise was faster. Not labored yet. Just faster. Megan's count came automatic. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 24 breaths per minute. At baseline 2 days ago, Emma's respiratory rate had held steady at 16. The child's eyes tracked toward the door as Dr. Pierce entered, his white coat crisp and tailored, his expression already locked in the expression of someone who had nowhere else to be and no patience for this place. Behind him came Colonel Hartwell, pushing his own wheelchair with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had learned to move through loss without acknowledging it. The Colonel's jaw was set at an angle that suggested he hadn't slept. Megan could read the signs, the way he gripped the wheelchair arms, the specific angle of his neck. This man had commanded men in terrain where the margin between alive and dead measured itself in heartbeats. "Good morning, Emma," Dr. Pierce announced, his voice carrying the bright false certainty of someone performing competence rather than practicing it. He didn't approach the bed. Didn't look at the monitors. Didn't touch the child. "How are we feeling today?" Emma's answer came as a whisper, which was wrong. 2 days ago, Emma had laughed at a joke about a dog and a fire hydrant. This whisper suggested something was pressing down on her ability to produce sound. Megan watched the Colonel's hands tighten. "She seems fine to me," Dr. Pierce continued, already turning toward the chart, the physical chart, not the monitor readouts. His eyes tracked down the page without actually reading. "We'll proceed with the imaging study this afternoon as scheduled. The CT will give us a better sense of her spinal healing trajectory. Standard protocol." Megan's voice came without permission. Not loud. Just present. "Doctor, her respiratory rates elevated. 24. She was 16 baseline. Her colors changed. Might want to do a full assessment before. I've been practicing medicine since before you learned to take a temperature, nurse clipboard." Dr. Pierce didn't look up from the chart. His tone suggested he was discussing the weather. "Perhaps you should focus on task-specific competencies rather than diagnosis. That seems to be where your strengths lie." The Colonel's eyes met Megan's for a single second. Recognition. Not of her identity. Of something else. The thing that was wrong in this room that the man in the white coat couldn't see and didn't care to see. Megan held her composure steady. Her face flat. Her hands at her sides. The mask held because it had to hold. This wasn't the moment. Not yet. "I'll arrange for her transfer to the pediatric floor," Dr. Pierce continued, making a note in the chart with the kind of decisiveness that came from conviction, not competence. "She's stable enough. We need the ICU bed for more acute cases. Staffing optimization." He turned to Colonel Hartwell with a professional smile. "Better care-to-patient ratios down there. Your daughter will get excellent attention." The Colonel nodded slowly, the kind of nod that meant he was tracking what was happening and calculating the position of every piece on the board. "Whatever's best for Emma, Doctor." Megan moved through the rest of rounds in a state of controlled dissociation. By 9 o'clock, she was assigned to admit a new patient on a different floor entirely, another act of strategic reassignment. Dr. Pierce's message crystallized into policy. By 9:30, she was 3 floors down when her phone buzzed with a message from a number she didn't recognize. "Hospital security initiated transfer from ICU to PED's floor, per physician order. Patient relocation in progress." But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was understanding that Emma had maybe 6 hours before that unnecessary CT scan bathed her in radiation and produced another $3,400 charge against the Colonel's insurance while Dr. Pierce collected his percentage from the imaging company. The worst part was knowing that something fundamental was wrong with the child's physiology and that the man with the authority to intervene had decided to move her away from continuous monitoring. The worst part was being aware that Megan's presence in Emma's room had just been systematically eliminated, and the person who had eliminated it was not acting out of incompetence. He was acting out of desperation. By 9:45, Emma was being moved. Megan knew this because the hospital operated on rhythms you could read if you'd ever coordinated movement through hostile terrain. Orderlies came in at specific intervals. Equipment was disconnected in a precise sequence. The child would be transferred to a regular pediatric floor where she'd have a nurse assigned to 4 or 5 other patients, where continuous cardiac monitoring would be replaced with hourly vital sign checks, where the margin between noticing something wrong and catastrophic failure would expand from minutes to maybe nothing. Megan was updating a patient chart, a 92-year-old with pneumonia whose heart was steady as a metronome, when the sound came through the hospital's acoustic system. Not a code. Not yet. But the kind of silence that precedes it. A sudden absence of sound. No monitor alarms. No voices. No motion. She was moving before her brain had finished processing what had moved her. The emergency stairwell was faster than the elevator, and she took the stairs 3 at a time with the muscle memory of someone who had run to casualties through rubble in Kandahar province where the smell of copper and diesel still lived in the back of her sinuses. The pediatric floor opened into a hallway that suddenly felt too narrow. Too quiet. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical song, a sound like insects trapped in a wall. Emma's room was at the end of the corridor. The door was open. The Colonel was standing, which meant something had triggered a response, his hands gripping the doorframe with a kind of intensity that suggested he was about to rip it from its hinges. Inside, the new nurse, Katie, young, competent in routine situations, was standing beside the bed with her hands frozen in uncertainty. Emma's color had shifted from gray to something closer to slate. Her lips held that faint blue cast, the cyanosis of a system not moving oxygen effectively. "Code team's coming," the new nurse said, but her voice carried the inflection of someone asking if that was the right choice. Dr. Pierce stood at the foot of the bed, moving toward the crash cart with the kind of slowness that suggested he was watching events unfold rather than controlling them. His hand was reaching out, not urgent, not trained, not the movement of someone who had seen this before and recognized the deadline. Emma's breathing had become something else, a shallow, rapid pattern that meant her body was trying to compensate for something fundamentally wrong beneath her ribs. Pneumothorax. Air trapped in the pleural space between the collapsed lung and the chest wall. The pressure mounting with every breath, collapsing the lung further, shifting the mediastinum, kinking the vena cava, cutting off the heart's ability to fill. The children Megan had treated at Bagram Airfield had looked exactly like this. The ones with blast injuries. The ones whose time you measured in minutes before the body began shutting down. Emma's oxygen saturation dropped from 94 to 88. The monitor sang its acceleration, beep, 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 the rhythm increasing like something panicked. "Emma," Colonel Hartwell's voice came low and absolute. A command voice. The kind that made people move. "Stay with me, sweetheart. Stay with me." Megan made her choice in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The crash cart was 6 feet away. She knew every drawer, every position, because she had made it her business to know, the way you knew exits, weapons, threats. The 14-gauge angiocath needle was in the second drawer, top left, exactly where military trauma protocol said it should be. She was moving, not running, moving with the kind of fluid precision that came from having done this while the world was actually burning. Her hands were already opening the sterile package as Dr. Pierce finally looked up, his expression shifting from confusion to something harder. "You're not assigned." Megan didn't answer. She was already locating the second intercostal space on Emma's pale, narrow chest. The needle felt right in her fingers. Muscle memory took over. The skin. The fascia. The plural space. You knew you were in the right place when. The hiss. That specific sound. Air escaping under pressure. 20 years of medical school couldn't teach you that sound. You learned it on your first casualty. The way it meant the pressure was releasing. The way it meant you were moving time back into the child's favor. Emma's eyes went wider for a moment, the shock of the intervention, but almost immediately something changed. Her shoulders dropped half an inch. Her breathing slowed. On the monitor behind her, the oxygen saturation began climbing. 88. 91. 95. The rhythm returning to something that resembled stability. Colonel Hartwell's hands released the door frame. His eyes locked on Megan's with the weight of someone watching a ghost become solid. Dr. Pierce's face shifted through a series of expressions, confusion, recognition, something like calculation, before settling into the expression of someone watching their world realign. "Code team's here," Katie said, the new nurse's voice catching slightly, her eyes moving between Megan and the monitor, processing what had just happened. What shouldn't have happened? What had happened anyway? Megan didn't wait for the code team. She moved past Dr. Pierce without a word, her face perfectly still as she crossed the 20 feet to Emma's bedside. The new resident stammered something about protocol, about authorization, but Megan was already reaching for the crash cart. 14-gauge needle. Her fingers found it like muscle memory, which it was. 18 years of muscle memory. Kandahar. FOB Shank. A field hospital under mortar fire where you didn't wait for hierarchy or committees or permission slips. You moved or your patient died. Emma's breathing had deteriorated to shallow gasps. Grey-blue pallor spreading across her small face like watercolor bleeding across paper. Oxygen saturation 71% and falling. Tracheal deviation, absent breath sounds on the right side. Tension pneumothorax. Not a diagnosis to debate. A death sentence to ignore. Megan's hands found the landmarks on Emma's ribs with the precision of someone who'd done this 243 times before. Second intercostal space. Midclavicular line. She didn't announce what she was doing. No explanations. No apologies. The colonel watched from his wheelchair as this supposed floor nurse positioned a 14-gauge angiocath needle at the exact anatomical point where a collapsed lung could be saved. The insertion was smooth. Direct. The needle passed through skin and muscle and pleura with barely any resistance. Then came the sound, the sudden hiss of air escaping. High pressure releasing. That specific sound meant survival. That sound meant a child's heart wouldn't stop in the next 90 seconds. Emma's color changed within 30 seconds. Her oxygen saturation climbed from 71 to 84 to 92 to 94. Her breathing deepened. Her lips returned from grey-blue to pale pink to something approaching normal. The colonel's eyes widened, not with gratitude, but with recognition. The kind of recognition that comes when you've seen tactical precision before. When you've watched combat medics work. When you understand the difference between a nurse and a soldier who happened to wear scrubs. The code team arrived 2 minutes later to find Emma stable. Breathing normally. Vitals climbing. A textbook needle decompression already completed. One of them looked at Megan with something like awe. The other started reaching for a chest tube setup that was now unnecessary. Dr. Pierce's face went the color of old liver. His jaw worked silently for a moment, the way jaws do when someone's entire plan just exploded. Then his voice came back, low and controlled and absolutely furious. You performed an invasive procedure without authorization. Without a physician order. That's immediate grounds for termination. He didn't wait for her response. He turned and walked toward the stairs, pulling his phone from his coat pocket before he was even off the floor. The administrator. The chief of staff. The 2 board members who'd approved his last 3 requests for equipment he'd billed at 3 times market rate. The ones who owed him favors because he brought their medical center referrals. The ones who understood that protecting a doctor was cheaper than investigating why he needed protecting. By 1:56 p.m., Megan was sitting in an emergency disciplinary hearing in the hospital's executive conference room. 7 people across a mahogany table. Dr. Pierce presented his case with the confidence of someone who'd never had a case backfire before. He used the word reckless. He used the word lucky. He suggested that Megan had received no formal training in needle decompression, had taken tremendous risk, could have lacerated a lung or artery. The administrator nodded along like a man who'd already made his decision before walking into the room. Megan didn't speak. She knew her rights. She knew that anything she said would be used to establish that she knew better and did it anyway. That's how you strengthen their case. Her composure was absolute. Hands folded on the table. Expression neutral. The same face she'd worn in military tribunal when they were reviewing decisions she'd made in combat. The face of someone who'd already accepted the consequences before taking the action. The administrator fired her at 2:31 p.m. Effective immediately. We're recommending license suspension to the State Nursing Board. You'll be escorted from the building by security. Your badge will be collected at the front desk. She didn't argue. She signed the termination papers and stood. Dr. Pierce didn't meet her eyes. He was already thinking about the next thing, probably how quickly he could get her case sealed, how to make sure the disciplinary filing disappeared into bureaucratic dust, how to ensure that nobody connected this terminated nurse to Captain Megan O'Brien of the 7th Special Forces Group, who technically shouldn't exist at Cedar Creek Medical in the first place. Security arrived within minutes. 2 guards who looked uncomfortable with the assignment. They escorted her through the hospital at 3:56 p.m. Staff watched from doorways. The break room went silent as she passed. Whispers started before she was even out of earshot. That was always how it happened. First the silence. Then the narrative. Then the erasure. The nurse who got fired for overstepping. The person who didn't understand chain of command. By tomorrow, she'd be a cautionary tale about knowing your role. The uniform she'd worn for 6 months was returned to hospital laundry at 4:23 p.m. Megan stood alone in the basement facility, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry insects. Industrial washers hummed in cycles that lasted exactly 47 minutes each. The smell of bleach and industrial detergent hung in the air like a chemical fog. Somehow worse than the metallic dust of Kandahar. Worse because this wasn't warfare. This was bureaucracy. This was a system designed to protect physicians over patients. Designed to protect profit over children. She folded her scrub slowly. Methodically. Not because she was taking her time. Because precision was the only thing left. The navy blue top with the name badge that had never included her rank. The matching pants with pockets designed to hold stress and small traumas and the weight of other people's suffering. She folded them into rectangles and placed them in the return bin. That was the official end. That moment. Fabric sliding into a plastic bin. Cover destroyed. Her hands paused for just a fraction of a second on the edge of the bin. The only acknowledgement that her assignment had just become impossible. Emma was alive. Emma would probably walk again with the right therapy. Emma's father would never know that the nurse he'd watched save his daughter was the same person he'd been briefed about during his classified security clearance. The operation was blown. The mission was over before it really began. Megan turned and walked out of the laundry facility. The evening rain had started outside, hammering the loading dock like applause for a show that nobody paid to see. She stood under the overhang for exactly 3 seconds, then stepped into it. The rain was cold and real and honest. Better than the air inside. That was when her personal phone vibrated. The one that didn't show a number. The one that connected directly to JSOC command. The one she'd been told to expect only in the event of immediate operational emergency. She'd been fired for 2 hours and 17 minutes. The hospital's routine background audit flagged her that next morning at 08:47. 2 Pentagon liaisons walked into the administrator's office with a file that couldn't be photocopied, couldn't be removed from the building, couldn't exist in any official record. Megan was still in the laundry facility, folding discharge gowns with mechanical precision, when Jennifer found her. Her hands didn't shake. They never did. "There are federal agents in the administrator's office," Jennifer whispered, her face pale. "They're asking for you by name." Megan finished folding the gown. "Placed it in the bin." Her voice came out steady as a metronome. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes." The walk from the laundry basement to the third-floor administrative wing took exactly 4 minutes and 30 seconds. She counted each footstep. Tile turned to carpet. The fluorescent lights of the lower levels gave way to the softer recessed lighting of executive country. 2 military officers in dress blue stood outside the administrator's office. The younger one's jaw tightened when he saw her. He knew. They always knew. Inside, the administrator sat rigid in his chair, the color drained from his face. The 2 Pentagon liaisons, a Marine colonel with silver-streaked hair and a Defense Intelligence Agency woman whose eyes held the cold calculation of someone who'd spent 20 years reading satellite imagery, rose when Megan entered. Neither extended a hand. "Captain O'Brien," the colonel said. It wasn't a question. "Your cover is compromised. The mission is terminated as of 0600 this morning when Cedar Creek Medical's IT department flagged your security clearance during the quarterly background audit." Megan's face remained blank. The administrator looked like he'd been asked to swallow a live grenade. "Your actions during the medical emergency were justified," the DIA woman continued, her voice carrying the texture of refined bourbon, smooth, burning. "The needle decompression was a lawful response to imminent threat of death. However, those actions exposed capabilities that were classified." "Colonel Hartwell is en route," the Marine said. "He was read in this morning. His daughter is safe. That was always the priority." The office door opened. Colonel Hartwell entered in his dress uniform, his wheelchair-bound daughter beside him in a specialized stroller. Emma's eyes locked onto Megan with the intensity of someone who'd been waiting for something they couldn't quite name. The child leaned forward, her thin voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel through skin. "Nightingale Actual," Emma whispered. The room went absolutely silent. You could hear the rain that had started outside, hammering the glass like applause no one had requested. Megan's jaw clenched once. Just once. That was all she allowed herself. The colonel's face changed. Recognition rippled across his features like shock through water. He'd heard that call sign. Probably in a JSOC secure call somewhere. Probably thought it was a man. Probably never considered that the woman he'd watched in his daughter's hospital room, methodical, precise, with the bearing of someone who'd already survived things that break normal people, carried a designation that meant the nurse who doesn't die. "That's classified," the DIA woman said flatly. "How did your daughter know that?" "She heard it during a secure call 6 weeks ago," the colonel said, his eyes still on Megan. I never thought it was." He stopped. Swallowed. "You've been watching over my daughter since she arrived." Megan didn't confirm. Didn't deny. Just stood there with the kind of composure that comes from having already accepted the worst possible outcome and discovered you could survive it. The Marine colonel pulled a folder from his briefcase. "Official. Stamped. Sealed. A Marine Corps liaison will be present while we discuss Captain O'Brien's service record," he said to the administrator, who looked like he was currently experiencing some form of cardiovascular event. The Marine opened the folder. Read with the formal precision of someone laying stones for a monument that would outlast them all. "Captain Megan O'Brien, 7th Special Forces Group, Delta Company. Commission 2010. Multiple combat deployments." He paused between each declaration, letting them land like impacts. "Bronze Star." Another pause. The administrator's hands gripped the desk. "Silver Star." Emma leaned forward in her stroller. 2 Purple Hearts. The colonel's expression shifted. That was the look of a man realizing he'd underestimated who he was standing next to. "And a Navy Cross." The words hung in the air like humidity before a storm. Dr. Pierce had entered through the back entrance. He stood in the doorway, his face the color of old newspaper, and something in him snapped like dry wood in a fire. His voice came out in a roar that shook the window frames. "This is military theater," he screamed. "You think you can intimidate me with costumes and medals? I've been practicing medicine for 32 years. I'm not afraid of." "You should be," the DIA woman said. Her voice didn't rise. Didn't need to. It just was, and that was terrifying. "Your home computer was accessed by the FBI Cybercrimes Division at 021 for this morning. They recovered 17 deleted emails, login records for personnel database access at 2,347 last night, and a very clumsy attempt to alter Captain O'Brien's employment file using forged documentation." Pierce's face went from red to gray in 4 seconds. "The forensic audit of your billing practices revealed 143 unnecessary imaging procedures over 18 months, she continued. $847,000 in kickbacks from Summit Imaging Solutions. Insurance fraud. And now obstruction of a federal investigation by attempting to fabricate evidence against a military officer on active classified assignment." The administrator made a sound like air escaping from a tire. "Federal agents are in your office now," the Marine said. "They have a warrant. You have the right to remain silent." The silence that followed was so complete it had weight. Emma reached out and touched Megan's hand. Just a brief contact. The child's fingers were fragile as bird bones, but her grip was steady. 3 hours later, Dr. Pierce was loaded into a federal vehicle in the parking lot while staff who'd once laughed at his jokes watched from the windows. His hands were cuffed. His face was the color of spoiled meat. Someone called out, "You have rights," but he didn't respond. Just looked broken in a way that suggested the handcuffs were almost unnecessary. The board members who'd supported him suddenly became very interested in their phones. The administrator offered Megan full reinstatement with back pay. The Marine colonel shook his head. "Captain O'Brien's mission is complete. Her assignment was to protect Colonel Hartwell's daughter from foreign intelligence leverage. That objective has been achieved. She's been recalled to active duty." Megan didn't move. Didn't react. Just stood there while the world rearranged itself around her like puzzle pieces clicking into place. 6 months later, she wore the uniform that had been waiting underneath civilian scrubs. Rank visible on her shoulders. Captain. 7th Special Forces Group, assigned to Walter Reed Medical Center's Surgical Trauma Unit, where her hands that had held people together in the dust of Kandahar could now be used in places where the lights never went out and the backup never ran late. A package arrived from Norfolk. Color photographs. The first showed Dr. Pierce in an orange work-release vest, loading boxes into a medical supply van. For years for federal fraud. For more years of his life, each one worth less than the equipment he was moving. Megan set that photo aside. Picked up the second one. Emma Hartwell stood from her wheelchair. Just barely. Her legs shaking like new foals, supported on either side by a Navy physical therapist in dress whites, Commander Sarah Chen, the specialist Megan had quietly recommended after her cover was blown and her real mission began. Not watching for threats anymore. Teaching a child to walk again. The colonel's letter was handwritten. "Captain O'Brien, Emma stood yesterday. The doctors said she'd never recover below the waist. They gave up. You didn't. The protocol you suggested has given us our daughter back. You saved her twice. Once in that hospital room, and once by refusing to accept their prognosis." Megan stood in the Walter Reed break room, other military nurses chatting around her about rotations and patient loads and the normal architecture of normal lives. She pinned the photo of Emma standing to her locker right next to the faded 7th Special Forces group patch that had been sewn inside her jacket lining. That small reminder of why she'd walked into Cedar Creek Medical in the first place. A young lieutenant, fresh from her first deployment, asked about the decorations on Megan's dress blues. Asked what it took to earn a Navy Cross. Asked if she was scared. Megan's face remained composed. Her voice came out steady, measured, carrying the weight of someone who understood exactly what fear was and what came after you survived it. The quietest person in the room might be holding it all together, she said. She closed her locker and walked back to rounds. Her hands were steady. Her mission was clear. Emma would learn to walk. And somewhere in a work release uniform, Dr. Pierce was learning the price of hurting people who refused to break. Some nurses save lives in operating rooms. Some save them by refusing to accept that anyone was ever truly lost. Subscribe for more stories of hidden heroes and karma delivered with precision. Like this video if you've ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea who they were standing next to. And comment, have you ever judged someone only to find out you were dead wrong?